My name is Adrienne Marsh. I'm 44 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. For 16 years I was married to Colton Reyes, a commercial real estate broker who built his whole personality around being the smartest man in every room he walked into. We have 2 daughters, Marlo, 14, and Sage, 11. I spent most of my career as a forensic accountant, the kind of quiet, unglamorous work that involves finding money people have tried very hard to hide. Colton used to call it my little numbers hobby. He was about to find out exactly how much of a hobby it wasn't. Before I go further, wherever you're watching from tonight, Nashville, Charlotte, Phoenix, a break room somewhere in between, drop your city in the comments, because I read every single one. And this community means more to me than you know. If you're new here, hit subscribe, because we tell real stories about real consequences. And here's my honest question for you tonight. If you found out your marriage had been a performance for years, would you end it quietly? Or would you make sure the whole performance had an audience for the finale? Hold that thought. Because what happened 90 days after our divorce was finalized is something Colton's own attorney still won't discuss on the record. But first, you need to understand exactly how a woman becomes the smartest person in a room full of people who've decided not to notice. Colton and I met in graduate school in 2008. Both of us broke. Both of us ambitious. Both of us convinced we were going to build something enormous together. He had the charm, the kind that got him into rooms other people waited years to enter. I had the discipline. He used to joke, in the early years, that between the two of us we made one fully functional adult, and we'd laugh, because back then it felt like a compliment to both of us equally. For the first several years, it worked exactly like a marriage should. He sold buildings. I audited fraud cases for a regional bank, then went independent, building a forensic accounting practice one careful referral at a time. The kind of business that grows slowly, because it depends entirely on trust, rather than marketing. Something shifted around year 7, right after Colton closed his first 8-figure deal. I remember the exact dinner. He came home glowing, poured 2 glasses of wine and said, "Babe, I think it's time you thought about scaling back. The girls need more of you, and honestly, my income covers everything now." It sounded generous. It sounded like partnership. It took me years to understand it was actually the moment he decided my value had an expiration date, tied directly to how much he made. I said yes that night, mostly because I believed him, and partly because I was tired in the specific way new mothers with full careers are tired. The kind of tired that makes almost any offer of relief sound like love. I didn't scale back. Not entirely. But I did let my practice shrink to a handful of loyal clients so I could run the house, the school schedules, his parents' medical appointments, the entire invisible architecture that kept our family upright while his name appeared in the business journal twice a year. And slowly, the language changed. I stopped being my wife, the forensic accountant at parties. I became my wife. She does some bookkeeping. Keeps busy. Bookkeeping, 12 years of chasing 7-figure fraud schemes, reduced to a hobby word at a cocktail party. Delivered with that same small laugh every single time. The one that told the room I was decorative now, not dangerous. What made it harder to name, for a long time, was that Colton was genuinely good at the parts of marriage that are easy to photograph. He never missed a school recital. He remembered our anniversary without a reminder. He was, by every visible measure, a devoted father and a present husband. That's the part I need you to understand, because it's the part that keeps so many women silent for so long. You cannot build a case against someone using only the good moments as evidence, and the good moments were real. It was only in the specific, narrow lane of my professional worth that something in him curdled, quietly, over years, into something close to contempt. And because that lane was narrow, I let myself believe, for a long time, that it didn't count as the whole truth of him. The first real crack came at his father's 70th birthday, when his cousin, an actual CPA, asked me a technical question about revenue recognition and I answered it in under 30 seconds, correctly, in front of 20 relatives. Colton laughed and said, "See, this is why I never worry about our taxes, free labor." Everyone chuckled. I refilled my wine. The second crack came when Colton's business partner, a decent man named Neil, quietly asked if I'd ever consider reviewing their books. Just an outside set of eyes. "You clearly know this stuff cold." Colton, sitting right there, said, "Neil, she hasn't looked at a real ledger in years. Let's not put that pressure on her." I hadn't asked for pressure. I'd been offered respect, and my husband had intercepted it before it reached me, the same way he'd started intercepting everything that made me sound like more than furniture. I remember driving home that night in silence, replaying it, trying to name exactly what had happened, because on the surface it sounded almost protective. It took me another year to understand that protection and diminishment can wear identical clothing, and the only way to tell them apart is to notice who actually benefits from the arrangement. The third crack, and this is the one that never fully healed, was the night I overheard him on the phone with his brother, laughing about keeping Adrienne comfortable, so she doesn't get any big ideas about going back to work full-time. Keeping me comfortable. As if I were a pet. As if 2 decades of expertise could be managed the way you manage a mildly restless golden retriever. 3 cracks, years apart, and every single time, the same undertone: a woman with real capability was more useful to him diminished than dangerous. I told myself it was the price of a comfortable life, the trade every long marriage makes. I was very good, back then, at lying to myself in complete, well-organized sentences. I suppose that's a professional habit too. Then, 18 months ago, I found the first anomaly. Not in our marriage, in his business. It started small, the way real fraud almost always does. I was helping Colton with something as mundane as reorganizing our home office, when I found a printed statement from an LLC I didn't recognize. Meridian Sunrise Holdings, with his signature on it, dated 11 months earlier. I asked him about it over dinner, casually, the way you'd ask about a grocery receipt. He said, "Oh, that's nothing. Just a side investment thing with Neil, don't worry about it." His voice had the practiced smoothness of a man who had answered a question like that before. I did not press. I did what I've done professionally for 20 years when something doesn't add up. I went quiet. And I went looking. It took 4 months of careful after-hours work, the kind you do on your own laptop at 11 at night after the girls are asleep, to understand what Colton had actually built. Meridian Sunrise Holdings wasn't a side investment, it was a shell entity, formed the same month his firm closed its biggest deal of the decade, funneling a percentage of commission income away from the marital books and into an account his brother had access to. Not embezzlement from clients, I want to be precise, because precision is the entire foundation of what came next, but a deliberate, sustained effort to understate our joint marital income by roughly 40%. Positioning himself for exactly the situation he never imagined I'd see coming, a divorce he assumed he could control. I want to be honest about something. Those 4 months were some of the loneliest of my life. I was building a case against my own husband, inside my own house, sleeping next to him, packing his lunches, and I could not tell a single living soul what I was doing. Because I didn't yet know what I was going to do with what I found. My sister called twice a week, and I told her everything was fine. My best friend Talia noticed I'd gotten quiet and asked if Colton and I were okay, and I said, we were just busy. I have spent my whole career telling other people the truth about their finances. I had never once had to sit inside a lie of my own for that long, and it costs something. I want anyone listening who is in the middle of exactly this kind of quiet, private reckoning to know, it is allowed to be hard even when you're doing it right. I sat with that discovery the way you sit with a diagnosis. Quietly, completely, and then, 3 weeks later I found the second piece. Almost by accident, forwarded to our shared family email by mistake, a message from Colton to a divorce attorney named Priya Nair, dated 8 months earlier. 8 months. Before I'd found a single anomaly. Before I had any idea he was even unhappy. The subject line read, "Timeline for filing, need Adrienne financially boxed in before she notices Meridian." I read that sentence 4 times. My husband had been planning to leave me, and specifically planning to leave me poor, for the better part of a year, while I made him dinner and drove our daughters to piano lessons and let his mother believe our marriage was fine at Sunday brunch. He hadn't fallen out of love, he'd built a spreadsheet. I did not confront him. Understand something about me. I have spent my entire career learning that the person who reacts first in a fraud case is almost always the person who loses the paper trail. I closed my laptop, went upstairs, kissed my daughters goodnight, and lay awake until nearly 4 in the morning doing the same arithmetic I do for every case I've ever worked. Except this time the fraudster slept 6 inches away from me. By morning, I had made a decision. If Colton wanted to plan quietly, I would outplan him. Completely, legally, and on a timeline entirely of my own choosing. I called Priya Nair's office. Not to hire her, obviously, but to confirm something I already suspected. Colton had chosen a good attorney, but not a great one. And certainly not one who specialized in hidden business income. That gap was mine to exploit. The attorney I actually hired was a woman named Denise Okafor, a family law partner, who had built a specific, quiet reputation for one thing: untangling spouses who hid money inside business entities. Our first meeting ran 2 hours. I brought 4 months of forensic work already organized into a clean, indexed binder: bank records, formation documents, commission statements cross-referenced against his firm's own filings, every anomaly flagged and dated. She looked through 11 pages of it in silence, then looked up at me and said, "Adrian, I've been doing this 18 years. I've never had a client walk in with the case already built. Most of them walk in devastated. You walked in prepared. I've spent my whole career finding exactly this," I told her. "I just never expected to find it at my own kitchen table." She asked me one more question before we went any further. "What do you actually want out of this? Not what's fair on paper. What do you want to feel when it's over?" I thought about it for a long moment. I want him to understand, completely, on a day he doesn't see coming, that he was never as far ahead of me as he thought he was. Denise nodded slowly, the way you nod at a diagnosis you already suspected. "Then we're not going to rush this," she said. "We're going to let him think he's finished." Here was the strategy Denise and I built together, over the following months, in complete silence from Colton. We would not confront him with the Meridian Sunrise discovery immediately. Instead, we would let him file first, let him believe he was executing his own carefully engineered plan, and let his attorney present a settlement built entirely on the understated income he thought he'd successfully hidden. We would let him win. We would sign it. And only after the ink was dry, once the underlying settlement was final, entered, and Colton believed the entire chapter was closed, would we file a separate motion, based on newly discovered evidence of fraudulent non-disclosure of marital assets, to reopen and correct the financial terms under Tennessee law. Not to punish him for leaving. To correct a settlement built on a lie he had spent a year constructing. This only works, Denise told me, if you can sit across from him at a mediation table, knowing everything you know, and not let your face show a single piece of it. Can you do that? I thought about every dinner party, every cocktail hour, every time I'd smiled through bookkeeping and little numbers hobby and keeping her comfortable. I had been training for exactly this moment for 16 years, without knowing it. "I can do that," I said. There was one moment, weeks before mediation, when the whole plan nearly slipped away from me. And I think you deserve the honest version of this story, not just the composed one. Colton came home early one evening in February, poured 2 glasses of wine without asking, and said he'd been thinking that maybe we'd moved too fast. That maybe with some counseling we could find our way back to something real. He cried, actually cried, at our kitchen table, the same table where I'd first found the LLC statement. He said things about feeling like he'd lost himself somewhere in the last few years, about missing who we used to be before the money and the deals and the noise. For about a week, I let myself sit with the possibility that he meant it. I even mentioned it to Denise, carefully, half expecting her to talk me out of it. She didn't talk me out of anything. She simply asked one question. "Has he mentioned Meridian Sunrise once? In any of these conversations? Has he offered to open a single book to you?" He hadn't. Not once. He wanted reconciliation on the exact same terms as before. Full access to my patience, zero access to my judgment. The moment I understood that clearly, the softness in me closed back up, cleanly, like a door that had drifted open in a draft and simply needed to be pulled shut again. 2 weeks later, mediation proceeded exactly as planned. The mediation happened on a rainy Tuesday in March. Colton arrived confident, almost cheerful, in a suit I'd bought him for our anniversary 2 years earlier. His attorney presented a settlement built on his official, understated income, modest alimony, a fair-sounding but quietly generous to him division of assets, primary custody arrangements that gave him more flexibility than he deserved. I sat there, hands folded, and agreed to nearly everything. Denise, beside me, nodded along like a woman closing an ordinary case. There is a specific kind of discipline required to sit in a room and watch someone celebrate a victory you know is fraudulent, and say nothing. My training helped. In forensic work, you learn early that the moment you tip your hand, the evidence trail changes shape. Documents get misplaced. Accounts get restructured. I had watched it happen in other people's cases 100 times. I simply had never expected to be sitting on the other side of that particular table, in my own life, running the exact same discipline on my own husband. At one point his attorney made a small joke about how reasonable I was being. And Priya Nair actually thanked me for making this so much easier than most of these get. I said, "I just want this to be fair," and I meant every word of it. Because fair was exactly what I intended to make it. Eventually, Colton could not stop smiling. At one point, walking out to the parking lot, he actually put his hand on my shoulder and said, "See? This didn't have to be ugly. I always said you were reasonable." Reasonable, that word again, the same soft leash she'd used on me for years. There was one moment, I'll admit, when it nearly slipped away from me. 2 weeks after mediation, before the paperwork was even finalized, Colton showed up at the house with flowers and an apology I hadn't asked for, said he felt guilty about how things ended. Said maybe we'd rushed things, said the girls seemed sad. For about 6 hours, I let myself wonder if some version of decency was surfacing in him after all, if the timeline in that email had been panic, rather than plan. Denise brought me back to earth with one phone call. "Adrian, he is not apologizing. He is checking whether the settlement is still safe. Do not confuse guilt with fear." She was right, of course. 2 days later I heard, through a mutual friend, that Colton had told his brother the divorce had gone about as smooth as I could have hoped. Smooth, meaning cheap. Meaning exactly what that email had promised him 8 months earlier. The official divorce was finalized in late spring. Colton believed, completely, that he had gotten exactly what he'd engineered. He had 90 days to enjoy that belief. 90 days of telling his brother the whole thing had gone smooth. 90 days of a mild, almost affectionate ease settling back into how he spoke to me when we handled custody logistics. Because relief makes people generous. And Colton, believing he'd gotten away with something, was more relaxed with me during that stretch than he'd been in the final 2 years of our marriage. There was something almost unbearable about that, watching him be kind to me because he thought he'd won, when the truth was the opposite of what he believed. I let him have it. I let him have every single one of those 90 days. Because I understood something Denise had told me on our very first meeting, that the value of what we were building only existed if he never saw it coming. 90 days is not an arbitrary number. Under Tennessee procedure, it's precisely the window Denise needed to file a motion to reopen the financial terms of a finalized divorce, based on newly discovered evidence of fraudulent non-disclosure. Evidence that, on paper, I had only just discovered, even though I'd been holding it, organized and notarized, for the better part of a year. Denise had explained the mechanics to me carefully months earlier. The discovery had to be framed, accurately, as evidence I could not reasonably have acted on until the settlement was final. Since the fraud claim only became legally actionable once the underlying agreement it corrupted was actually in place. It was not a trick. It was procedure, used precisely. The motion landed on Colton's doorstep on a Thursday morning, delivered by process server while he was leaving for a client showing. I know this because Neil, his business partner, who by then had his own reasons to be furious with Colton, having learned exactly how Meridian's Sunrise Holdings had also quietly diverted funds that should have gone toward their firm's shared expenses, called me that afternoon, stunned, to ask if I'd known. "I've known for about a year, Neil," I told him. "I just decided which year I'd use it." The hearing took place 6 weeks later, in a courtroom, not a mediation room, because fraud claims don't get resolved over coffee and a handshake. I remember the specific quality of the light in that room, gray and flat through tall windows, and how quiet it was compared to how loud the last year of my life had felt inside my own head. Denise laid it out with the clean, devastating precision of a woman who has done this 100 times. The LLC formation date, aligned precisely with his firm's largest deal. The diverted commission percentages, itemized, month by month, for 3 full years, cross-referenced against bank records his own attorney had certified as complete. And the email, the one with the subject line about boxing me in. Read into the record, in full, in a quiet courtroom, in front of a judge who did not react well to spouses who planned financial ambushes 8 months in advance. I watched Colton's face while Denise read that subject line aloud. I had imagined this moment for the better part of a year. Rehearsed it in the shower the way you rehearse a speech, and the reality was quieter than I expected. No gasp, no dramatic collapse. Just a man going very pale and very still in a courtroom chair. Understanding in real time that a document he'd forgotten existed had just outlived his entire strategy. Colton's attorney tried to argue timing. Tried to argue I'd waited too long. Tried to suggest the discovery itself was suspicious in its convenience. The judge was not persuaded. Non-disclosure of marital assets during a divorce, especially demonstrably premeditated non-disclosure, is not treated gently in family court. And Colton's own words, his own sentence, his own timeline, had already told the entire story before Denise said a single additional word. I sat at that table in a plain navy suit, hands folded exactly the way I'd folded them in mediation, and I said almost nothing, because I didn't need to. Denise had built a case where the facts did the talking, and facts, unlike people, don't have the decency to soften themselves for anyone's ego. The revised settlement corrected the asset division based on Colton's actual income, awarded significant retroactive support, and, this is the part that mattered most to me, more than any dollar figure, entered a formal judicial finding that Colton Reyes had knowingly and materially misrepresented marital assets during divorce proceedings. That finding is public record now. It follows him. Neil, once he saw the filing, quietly restructured Colton out of any future role in decisions involving firm finances, not because I asked him to, but because a business partner who diverts shared commission money quietly for 3 years is not a business partner most people keep trusting with a signature. Outside the courthouse, Colton caught up to me on the steps, furious, disbelieving, asking how I could have done this after everything, asking if this had been the plan from the beginning. His voice had none of its usual polish. I noticed that, clinically, almost professionally, the way a person sounds when the story they've told themselves for a year has just been read back to them by a judge. No, I said. You built the plan, Colton. I only ever followed your timeline. You just assumed I couldn't read it. I looked at him for a moment, really looked, the way I used to look at fraud files before I understood exactly what they were going to reveal. For 16 years, you called me a bookkeeper at parties. I want you to sit with the fact that a bookkeeper found every single dollar. He didn't have an answer. I hadn't expected one. Some sentences aren't invitations to a conversation. They're just true, and the truest ones rarely need a reply. I turned and walked to my car. I did not look back to see his face. I'd already spent an entire year imagining it, and the reality, I found, mattered far less than I expected. Which is, I think, the strangest and most honest thing anyone tells you about revenge that actually resolves into something calmer. You spend so long anticipating the moment that by the time it arrives, it's almost administrative. What stays with you afterward isn't the win. It's the quiet. It's been 8 months since the hearing. I've grown my practice back to what it was before I ever scaled it down. Busier now, actually, because 2 family court judges have quietly referred clients my way, people who need exactly the kind of patient, precise work I do. Marlo and Sage split their time between us, and Colton, to his credit, has been steady with them. Which I try to hold separately from everything else. Because they deserve a father who shows up, even from a man who once tried to box their mother into nothing. Marlo, who is 14 and notices everything, asked me once, carefully, whether I hated her father. I told her the truth, that I didn't hate him, that I simply stopped being willing to let him decide what I was worth. And that those are 2 very different things. I hope she carries that distinction longer than I carried it myself. I also want to say something about Talia, my best friend, and my sister. The 2 people I couldn't tell during those 4 lonely months. When it was finally over, I told them everything, start to finish, and Talia cried, and then laughed, and then said, "You built an entire legal strategy in secret while making his lunches," and I said yes, and she said, "That might be the most you sentence I've ever heard," and honestly, she wasn't wrong. My sister, who has never once in her life been accused of subtlety, said only good, he earned every bit of that Thursday morning. There is a version of this story where I told someone earlier, where I wasn't quite so alone in it, and I think about that sometimes. But I also know that the silence was part of what kept the timeline mine, and I've come to believe that some forms of strength really do require a period of complete privacy before they can survive being spoken aloud. Here's what I want you to sit with tonight. Because it's the part of this story that has nothing to do with courtrooms. For years I let a small, dismissive word, bookkeeping, hobby, comfortable, sit unchallenged at dinner tables, because challenging it in the moment felt smaller than simply outlasting it. I want to be honest, there is no universal right answer to that. Sometimes you should say something the second it happens. But sometimes, the most powerful response a person can give isn't spoken in the room at all. It's built quietly, afterward, with evidence, with patience, with a timeline of your own choosing instead of someone else's. I didn't win by proving I was smart in the moment he insulted me. I won by proving it on a Thursday morning, 90 days later, when he least expected anyone to still be paying attention. So here's my question for you tonight, and I mean it sincerely. Has someone in your life ever underestimated exactly how much you were quietly keeping track of? And when the moment came, did you use it right away? Or did you wait for the timeline that actually belonged to you? Tell me in the comments, along with your city, because somebody scrolling through tonight needs to read that they're not the only ones still building their case in the dark. Take care of yourselves. And remember, the quietest person in the room is very often the one holding all the receipts. Not because she's plotting revenge every waking hour, but because she's simply paying attention. In a world that keeps telling capable women to relax and let someone else handle it, pay attention anyway. Keep your own records. Trust your own timeline. It may take longer than you'd like. It is worth every quiet, unglamorous hour.